Hello and welcome to Elena Meets the Author. This podcast explores how authors create a world that we can escape into. Join me as we demystify the magic that keeps us turning the page. Today I'm speaking to Holly Gramazio, author of The Husbands, her first book, and it's so much fun to read. It's entertaining, philosophical, surprising, with just enough twists and turns to keep you engaged. Imagine if you could switch husbands with no emotional or financial cost. In Holly's book, the protagonist can swap out husbands like the roll of a dice. She never knows what she's going to get next. Don't tell me the thought isn't just a little intriguing. Obviously, I'm not referring to my very own husband. High stretch. The Washington Post calls the book delightfully addictive, a bottomless champagne flute of a novel with no hangover. Gramazio is a game designer by trade and had originally thought it would make a great game. Switching husbands, a little bit like swiping right. But then she decided it would work better as a book, and I'm so happy she did. In this Q&A, we discuss how moving from Australia to England gave her the vital missing piece for the novel, how too much choice isn't always a good thing, and what advice she would give a wannabe author. Oh, and how before she met her husband, when she was doing a bit of online dating, she made the best of it, and somehow it involves a cockroach costume. So listen up. I hope you enjoy the show. One night, Lauren comes home from a hen party to find a strange man in her house. Stranger still, he claims to be her husband, and all the evidence, from photos to electricity bills, seems to corroborate that. She's wearing a wedding ring, and so is he. His name is Michael. When Michael goes upstairs to the attic to change a light bulb, another man, or rather husband, this time a startlingly good-looking one, descends. She sends him back up to the attic, and down comes another. Lauren's attic, she begins to realize, is providing an endless supply of husbands for her. She gets the naked husband with an extraordinarily long penis, who jokes that they can take it on the Antique Roadshow, to the husband who likes to swing with the neighbors, to the husband with an impossibly long name, to the husband who wears shoes with individual toes. He doesn't last long. Your debut novel has been a smash hit with high praise from The Guardian, The Washington Post, The New York Times. I know I read it until the wee hours. It was such an enjoyable, fun read. Can you tell us how you got the idea for The Husbands, and was it as much fun to write as it seems?
I think the idea came from a few different places. For a while I've been interested in the idea of something that explores relationships starting at the middle, that skips through all of the getting to know you and trying to impress each other bit, and just puts the protagonist in the middle of a situation to try and figure out what's good, what's bad, what works, how happy she is. And I originally, 6 or 7 years ago, even tried to make that as a little video game, because my background is in game design. So I thought I'd make a tiny text-based video game, just a little thing that people would play over the course of 10 or 15 minutes. And I spent a couple of days working on that. And I couldn't really get it to click. Nothing was really working about it. I didn't have the attic then and the descending husbands. I just had the idea of choosing to stay in a relationship or to teleport almost to the middle of another one and see how that went. And yeah, it wasn't quite clicking. But a few years later, I came back to the idea and thought, well, I've always kind of wanted to write a novel. What if I try, instead of a game, try doing that? That's a well-established form. Might as well give it a shot. Yeah. And that was about when the idea of the attic came along as well. And that's when it really clicked. A thing that sometimes surprises people is that Australia, where I grew up, doesn't have attics. So we have a ceiling and we have a rooftop, and the space in the middle, no one ever really thinks about. It gets really hot there in summer. Maybe there's a dead possum. There's probably a bunch of spiders. It's not a thing that you use for storage or fit out to be able to keep your old Christmas tree up there, right? So when I
Yep.
moved to London and a bunch of people had these attics that I had only really encountered in children's books where maybe they're a portal to a magic world, that was definitely a little bit weird for me.
I love it. I love that. So that's why attics struck you because you'd never really come across them.
I think so. I think so. You know, in kids' books or in these 19th century Gothic novels where maybe there's a wife trapped up there. And once I thought, oh, attics are where the husbands come from, that kind of started to make sense of it. And I think it is important that it's an attic. If you imagine the same premise, but the husbands come out of the basement, it's a little bit ominous and terrible, right?
And there was that book, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, where I think they came out of the wardrobe, but an attic is much better because you get to see them descending.
Yeah, absolutely. That core image of standing in a hallway looking up at the attic hatch and the ladder descending, waiting to see who's going to climb down. Often when I work, whether it's writing or games or something else, I have like a couple of core images or emotions that I know I want to shape the work around. And that sense of nervous anticipation beneath an attic hatch was definitely one of those for the husbands.
It's funny, now that you're talking, I'm realizing that I don't really have a good idea of what Lauren looks like. I know what all the husbands look like, but I don't, and it didn't even occur to me until now. So it's not important,
Yeah,
clearly.
yeah. I think I wanted to stay very, very close into Lauren's point of view for the book. So the things that she tends to think about her appearance are the things that are different from normal. She obviously notices every husband when they come down because they're new to her. But when she looks in the mirror, she doesn't go, oh, my nose is its normal shape. Oh, my eyes are the same color they always are. She just goes, oh my God, my hair is shorter. What? Or she might go, oh, my legs are more muscular than usual. I must be into hiking or whatever it might be. The things that she picks up on are the things that are different.
I love it. That's very good. Not only do you have multiple husbands, you have multiple universes, worlds where Lauren's flat is messy, tidy, painted different colors, where the garden is overgrown, full of weeds, and others where it's looking flowery and lovely, all reflecting the husband's personality and its effect on the wife, Lauren. How did you keep all your husbands and worlds straight?
I had a lot of little spreadsheets and post-it notes and things stuck all over. I didn't really start at the beginning and then right towards the end. I wrote a lot of different fragments and husbands and moments and thought about different ways they might fit together. So for each husband, I really had to try to keep good track of his different traits and what he was like and how that had changed her environment and her world to make sure that I wasn't accidentally switching things up an implausible amount or plummeting her into the same situation over and over. The garden in particular became very important to me once I was shaping it all together because it's one of the few ways that I could help her to keep track of passing time, right? So each new husband, time is still passing. It's not a classic time loop story. So might get one in March, one in April, go through a bunch of them in May. But the world is still going on and doing all of its normal stuff. So having the garden there, sometimes in sort of states of abundance, sometimes in a huge mess, but nevertheless with the things that should be in flower being in flower and stuff growing and dying in time with the passage of the year felt really useful to me.
I really liked it because I never think of myself as a science fiction fan. I'm not. But what I liked was, yes, the husbands came and yes, her worlds changed a little bit. It was never that dramatic, but at least you always knew where you stood with her neighbors and her sister. You had constants. The pub was the same, where she lived was the same. So I felt anchored.
I'm glad that worked.
Yeah, I think, yeah, it definitely worked. I also read that, well, on your website, you've got the husband generator, which is hysterical. Can you tell us
Yes,
about that?
absolutely. So, because of my background in game design, at one point when I was beginning to feel a little bit stuck with the husband ideas, that I was returning to the same husband well a little too often, and that I wasn't really pulling on the full range of the type of men that someone like Lauren might meet and be with. I got the idea to make this tiny little husband generator, which is just a little digital toy. I made it in a language called Tracery, which is a sort of a generative grammar for making randomized text like this. And it's a bit like, you know, those flip books that have a hat and a bunch of faces and a bunch of torsos and legs, and you can combine them in different ways. It's a
Yeah.
bit like that, but instead of having 20 hats and 20 faces or whatever it might be, it has 600 jobs and 500 names and hundreds of hobbies and pets and habits and like things that the husband's parents might do, and stuff that they love, and television shows that they can have different opinions on. And each time you press the husband generator button, it just gives you a new one. And that was really good fun to make. But actually, I didn't use many of the husband generator husbands in the book itself. For me, it was more that the process of making the husband generator helped me expand my understanding of the sort of relationships Lauren might be in. So I would look through a list of jobs and come across some and think, oh, how would Lauren meet an architect? How would Lauren meet a tree surgeon? Does that ring true as something that might be in her life? Or look through the list of hobbies, and how would she feel about someone who's really into stamp collecting? How would she feel about somebody who's into hiking? That kind of thing.
Right.
So the process of making it was really, really useful to me, more than the actual finished toy.
Also, what I liked was the fact that every husband, I don't remember how many we actually met, she would have liked at some point in her life. So they weren't totally random.
Yeah, there's definitely something in them that called to her. Some of the husbands are only in there for a sentence or a paragraph, and you don't really learn much about them. But for all of the major husbands, I wanted to think about what is it in Lauren that would have drawn her to this person? How do they work together? What sort of needs are they fulfilling for her? Why are they interested in her? To have a sense of what that relationship might be like. So it's not just slotting a totally random man in, but rather making sure I know internally, even if that's never expressed explicitly within the text, why they worked as a couple.
Did you tend to have a lot of background on each husband that didn't necessarily go into the story?
Bits and pieces, not generally loads of, they went to school here, they went to university there, their best friend's name is Gerald or whatever it is, but definitely a sense of what they're like, sometimes beyond what there was space for within the context of the book. For many of them, I wrote a bunch of scenes that didn't make it into the finished book, just exploring what it's like for them and Lauren to spend time together, what the relationship feels like.
Yeah. I did think that Carter seemed like a good fit. And I also loved the way sometimes something might seem like a good fit to you, but maybe not to him. So much of it is just kind of circumstance. Like you liked
Yeah.
her in one life, but not necessarily in another life.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's not just who, but when and how, right?
Oh, I read in another interview that Tinder was kind of useful for you as a research tool.
Oh, it was definitely one of the inspirations. I did have an online dating phase, but it was slightly just before the sort of mainstream advent of Tinder. So when I was online dating, you had to sort of log in on a website and open profiles in tabs and all of that kind of things. But I've had so many friends who have just handed me their phone with Bumble or Tinder or whatever it is open on it and said, "Oh, can you have a go? Can you do it tonight?" Because they feel this obligation to go through the faces and swipe in one direction or another. It's this chore that they have to get around to, but at the same time, it's exhausting. It's this never-ending carousel that feels like the possibilities are endless in a way that prevents you from being able to really consider any of them in a way.
Right.
It's like being in a supermarket and going, I just need some jam to take home to have with my scones. And there's 400 different jams and you just get frozen, right? But instead of jams, it's people. So having sat there and gone through that carousel for friends and the feeling of that and the slight exhaustion of it, and they're like, better look at the next one, definitely informed my sense of how Lauren might feel about the husbands after it's been going on for a while.
It gets very frustrating, really frustrating. Yeah, you often want, I know for me, I live between London and England and America. And when I go back to the States, the choice sometimes in the supermarkets is too big. And I long for just these little markets where there's 4 types of jam, not 120.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm terrible at making decisions. If I were good at making decisions, I probably wouldn't have written this book, right? And and when I went on my US tour, the very first night I got in, I checked into my hotel in New York. I thought, okay, this is great. I should go out and get some dinner. It's about 7:30, 8 o'clock. And there's a burger place on one side of the hotel and a ramen place on the other side. I opened the menus. I thought, I can order to pick up. That's great. I filled in all of the criteria for the burger and then was like, maybe I don't want a burger. Maybe I want ramen. I took a break, made a decaf coffee, had a sit, looked out of the window, tried to sense within me what choice I wanted, went back, no, I do want ramen. They had both closed.
Oh, my God.
I had spent so long dithering between just 2 choices that I had to go around the corner, get a carton of cardboard tasting strawberries and have that for my dinner.
God, that's funny. And it was only 2.
It was only 2.
So imagine these people that are on Tinder. Wow. Yeah, I did some online dating, but way before also. And it was, people say Tinder's so great because there's so many choices. But I remember with Match, you really had to think about it and you had to do a whole profile. And there was a lot of thought that went into it. I'm not saying I met anybody through it actually, but yeah, so I don't really know what Tinder was like, although my husband did Tinder, and he said, kind of like you, he had a positive attitude. He needed someone to eat dinner with. That was, if worst came to worst, it was someone to have dinner with. Can you tell us, I read in an interview how you had sort of an optimistic way of looking at online dating that kind of got you through it?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So I really just set myself the task of going on a date every week. And I'd always schedule it to be at something that I thought would be interesting anyway. So I wouldn't go to dinner with someone that I'd only just met, because if you then spend an hour and a half talking to them and they're boring, then all you've done is sort of paid for something you could have made at home for cheaper and wasted an evening. But if you go to, an outdoor free theatre show or to an art exhibition, or one that I went on was a tour of the Science Museum where everyone put on a big cockroach costume.
So you and your date were in cockroach costumes?
We were both in cockroach costumes. And there was definitely no spark there, but we had a fun time. We learnt a lot about cockroaches, and we got to the end of it going, well, that was a nice thing to do. And so having that sort of dual thing of, I'll try and do one of these every week so I could then tick it off my to-do list and feel like I'd achieved something. I'm very easily motivated by crossing something off a list, which makes it quite easy to trick into doing things sometimes. And also it being something that in any case would be interesting, or a story, or that I'd have learned something or had some thoughts about art. That meant that, for the couple of months that I did it, I had a quite good time. I had fun with it. I do think every method for trying to find someone to date or to share your life with is kind of not much fun in the long term. I'm sure if I had done that for another 6 months, my perky, this is great, I'm going to meet another stranger from the internet, and this time we're going to go on a guided sound walk through an abandoned factory in far west London, illuminating the history of food manufacturing or whatever, would have kind of begun to pull.
Hysterical. I will admit, back to the book, that I was worried that I would get bored with husband overload. But you managed to add twists and turns that kept me engaged throughout. Did your job as a game designer help you? What was your writing process?
I think my past as a game designer definitely was very informative to that. I spent a lot of time just thinking about all of the different things that could happen, the different ways that things could go wrong or right, the different types of husbands that she might meet, the sort of twists and turns that could come up, and how to pace those in a way that felt very, very similar to designing a game where you want to time your player's expansion of the sense of the world and what is possible within it to sort of
Right.
hit just as they're hit before they get bored with it.
Right.
Right. So definitely structurally, I think there's a lot of game design thinking and feeling in that. I wrote stuff, like I was saying earlier, not in particular order, but just the sort of fragmentary husbands and moments and jokes and concepts. And then once I had a huge pile of that, the real work of actually shaping that into a narrative kind of began. And I definitely did lots of things like, making little graphs of how used to things people will be getting. How long is it since we last had a burst of quick husbands? What are the durations of the different husbands, and how does the rhythm of that feel?
Now, you have a husband.
I do.
And were any of his habits used, drawn on?
Not many of them. A couple of them for very minor husbands. Generally speaking, none of the major husbands are based on a person. I'd steal traits from friends or exes or from myself to give to husbands that were only around for a sentence or two.
I thought of an annoying trait you didn't have.
Oh,
Toenail clipping. And I won't say who does that. But I have one too. So on the serious side, it appears, we've touched on this a bit, that choosing amongst an endless supply of husbands can be as hard work and soul-destroying as online dating. Sending him back to the attic is a bit like swiping right. Can you tell us about the paradox of choice, which you've kind of touched on with the jam? So maybe you've answered that one.
Yeah, I think it is very, very overwhelming. I was talking to someone about this who was saying that, yeah, even when you're literally on a date, you feel like there's probably someone better in your phone, in your pocket. And I think the sense of abundance certainly makes me, and I think a lot of other people, feel like there must be one correct choice, and you just have to figure out what that correct choice is. But the truth is, of course, with jam or with potential partners or with restaurants to get your dinner at before they close, or places to live or jobs to do, there are some that would be terrible for you, right? It's not that anything will do. There'd be some that would be fine. You could probably make them work. And there'd be some that would be great. And it's not that there's one of those that is provably better than the others. They're good in different ways. Everything will have its little annoyances. Everything will have its strengths and joys that you maybe wouldn't get from any of the other picks. They're different, but they're not rankable.
Yeah, they're not deal breakers.
Yeah. And feeling like you need to pick the exact correct one is what ends up with me eating some cardboard strawberries because the restaurants have all closed, right?
Exactly. and people not really, I don't know, not finding the one finding anybody, because if you at some point, I think you touch on this, you have to decide. At some point,
Yeah.
Lauren has to decide.
And it might be that you decide on a thing that doesn't work out, and that's fine. It's better to have given it a go and gone, this didn't work out, rather than perpetually suspending the attempt until you're totally convinced that this is the right meal, this is the right job to apply for, whatever it might be.
Exactly. Online dating has some severe limitations. You might not have met your husband had you only read his dating profile. Can you tell us that story?
Yes. Oh, my goodness. So after I'd been dating for a couple of months, he suddenly sat up and looked at his phone and was like, oh, no, I forgot to delete my dating profile. He'd got an alert telling him he'd been sent a message. The fact that it was 2 months and he hadn't been sent a message in the interim to remind him is perhaps evidence of how not great the profile was. It was fine. It wasn't red flaggy or anything. It was just really, really dull. It was mostly about his work. It was written in this sort of very perky tone where everything had an exclamation mark, and it didn't really bespeak to a personality. It was just this kind of splurging of indiscriminate enthusiasm. And because he was very, very engaged in a game that he was working on at the time, he's also a game developer, a lot of it was about his work and how excited he was about that. And yeah, I read it. I made him let me read it before he deleted it. And I thought, there's nothing wrong with this. If a friend told me she was dating this man, I'd be like, yeah, okay, fine. Hope that works out for you. But I would never have sent a message to it. I would have just scrolled right through and gone, well, that seems a little bit dull. But because we didn't meet there, because we met in the real world and had a conversation long before I ever saw the profile, it went a very different way.
So what would the solution, is there a solution to how you could improve online sites so you really see the real honest person and not maybe the distracted?
It's very difficult, isn't it? Because everyone wants to put their best foot forward, and also people don't necessarily have a good sense of what about them will be appealing to people scrolling through. And it varies as well. We all have different tastes, which, thank goodness.
Yeah.
I think for me, the way everything has kind of folded down to this same fundamental interaction of swiping, and maybe there's a twist on it. Maybe you only get shown 5 faces a day, or maybe women have to send the message first, or whatever it is. But the fundamental interaction in most dating apps is still this same: look at the profile, swipe yes or no, see if there's a match, this little twiddly, almost game to play. I think is a shame. There are some people that works really well for, but I think an ecology where there's a greater variety of different types of interaction is really healthy. You mentioned you were on, was it Match?
Match.
Yeah. So on my online dating days, I was on OkCupid, because that was the dating app for giant nerds who want to answer 800 questions and get weird percentage matches and everything. And that was quite good fun. It was an entertaining thing, and the sort of access to match information that you got was a good fit for my brain personally. I thought it was fun to be able to see which deal breaker questions people had answered in different ways. I thought that seeing the way people had responded to the different prompts was amusing. Lots of people don't want to answer, hundreds of different quizzes and then get weird percentages or whatever it might be. It would have been terrible for them. It's not like there's one methodology that's the solution for everyone. But I do think the kind of flattening out of the ways that we can approach this is a bit of a loss. It's the
Yeah.
same. The same way that every social media thing that you can sign up to now is the same mix of sort of, here's some short form video, here's some sentences someone has said, here's some photos. And the distinction that we used to have between different types of this, Instagram serving one purpose, Twitter serving another, and so on, has kind of been flattened. I think a similar thing has happened with dating mechanisms.
I once had, during that same time as Match, there was a site called I Have a Friend, where a friend of mine wrote about me. I kind of liked that one, but she's a very good writer. You have to have a good writer friend. I think your one sounds good.
Yeah. I used to love writing writing profiles. I helped a few friends write profiles. My favorite was, at one point, I just put out the offer to anyone I'd met, going, I will write your dating profile if you want me to this week. And the one that I enjoyed most was for a guy that I'd only met a couple of times. So I just guessed a lot of things. I gave him opinions about types of cookies that perhaps he didn't really have, made up a lot of stuff. And at the end just said, this profile was written for me by someone who met me twice. If we go on 3 dates, you will know me better than she does. And you can then rewrite one of these answers at your
fantastic.
will. And apparently that went quite well for him. I met him again a few months later and was like, yeah, I'm dating someone now.
Amazing. That's fantastic. But it also sounds like a premise for the husbands, right? You were getting started.
I guess so.
I love it. So this was your first book. I mean, it's amazing how it's just, bestseller right away. What advice would you give other wannabe debut authors?
Yeah, interesting, tricky. I think the two main things that I would say, or three main things. Okay. First is, I spent a lot of time kind of feeling like the people who write books are in some way weird, special people who have been given access to information that the rest of us don't have. And that maybe at some point in my life, this specialness would be visited upon me, and then I would feel it possible to write a book. It turns out that's not true. People who write books are just, the same as the rest of us, except that they've stuck with it despite their sense that they don't know what they're doing. The way you find out how to write a book is to try to write the book. And then when you try to write another book, it turns out that a lot of things you learnt the first time through are no longer useful because it's a different book now. So every time, I say this in the early stages of book 2, which I'm being very frustrated by, every time it's a whole bunch of new stuff to learn. So you just have to be at peace with that and try it anyway. The second thing is that while you're writing it, you are figuring out how to write it. So the first draft, perhaps many first drafts, will be quite bad unless you're very lucky and the sort of writer that sort of writes clean the first time through, or who works slowly and meticulously and knows where it's all going. But I think for most people, first draft is going to be a mess, and you kind of have to accept that and look back at paragraphs and go, oh, I've made 3 attempts at the same sentence. I don't know why. I didn't realize when I was doing this that I have the same incident twice, the same dynamic twice, the same sentence 3 times. And the answer for that is because you were trying to figure out how to do it and which is best. And when you can look back at it with a little bit of distance, you can see which works and cut the others out.
Oh yeah, because you had a lot of endings.
Oh, at one point, yes. At one point I had multiple endings. It was a terrible idea. At one point I had 8, and I thought that was very clever. Thankfully, I realized about 2 days later that it was not very clever, but quite bad. So I cut out most of them before I even sent it to my agent. But it did still have 3 endings when it went to her.
So the same book, this book had
This
three,
book.
the reader would read three different endings.
Yes.
Just checking. Okay. So you mentioned that you're working on something now. Is it too early to tell us anything about that?
Yeah, it's still very messy, I think. Anything that I could say about it would probably end up not being true.
Okay. The only I guess question I have is will when we read the second book, will we be like, she's a game designer, that makes sense?
Interesting. I think I think maybe it's a little less game design inflected than the husband's. I think the husband's has a lot of exploring the rules of a situation, which is a very game design thing. And it in the husband's, it's very much a matter of the protagonist finding herself in this situation and then having to come to grips with her, which again, very like the experience of playing a game. Whereas in the next one, it's kind of more a question of the protagonists getting themselves into a situation.
Got it.
So perhaps
Yeah.
a little bit less,
Passive.
yeah, a bit less gamey, maybe.
Yeah, gaming. Okay, great. Last question is just, well, actually, no, I have one. Tell us something surprising about yourself.
Oh,
One.
okay. Ah, I was into urban exploration for a while in my
Urban
early
exploration?
20s. It's when you sort of get together with a group of friends and you go into a drain pipe or an abandoned building and hang out together there and sit and chat and then head out. That was
Wow,
very good fun.
I thought it was going to be going to different cities. I didn't realize.
No.
No, a little bit wetter and dirtier. Okay, and then the last question is just what books are you excited to read?
Oh, that are books that I haven't read yet, but I'm excited to read.
Yeah, because basically I'm always looking for ideas of people to interview. So I'm looking for new books versus classics. So even if you have read something that you loved, like me with the husbands, that was written, within the last year, tell me about it. But otherwise, if you have something that you are very excited to read.
Yeah, great question. I've been reading a lot of debuts this year because, it's my own debut novel year. It seemed like a fun idea to try to read a lot of other people's debuts. And there are a few of those that I've really loved. I loved Rebecca K. Riley's Greta and Vowden, which came out a couple of years ago in New Zealand, but just this year in the UK and the US, which is funny and sweet and incredibly readable and also very unapologetically New Zealandy. So it doesn't make any concessions to an international readership at all. I'm Australian. I've spent a few weeks in New Zealand. I feel for a foreigner more than usually equipped to read it. And I was Googling things constantly. I also liked Miranda Pountney's How to Be Somebody Else, which is a really lovely novel of an English woman in New York who kind of walks out of her life and tries to reinvent herself in not that far away, just different bit of New York, gets a sublet. And there's, just some really great...
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah, really great moments and sentences. And stuff that's coming out that I'm excited by. Monica Kim's The Eyes Are the Best Part, which is out in June, I think, is... I read an arc and it's an amazing sort of horror, comedy, literary fiction. Really, I normally can't read horror, and I definitely
horror.
I definitely read the more horrifying bits of this kind of through squinted eyes, but it's so good. I think that's definitely
Fantastic.
An exciting one.
Fantastic. What would you say about me? If you had to look at me, what kind of surprising thing? I'm trying to think of something because you're very good at like summing people up by the way they look, including yourself. So now I'm trying to think of the perfect question to elicit a funny answer from you. Well, if you saw me walking down the street and you had to say a few sentences about what my home looked like, what would they be?
I
Well,
would.
you can see it a little bit, so
Yes,
no
I
cheating.
can. I can. I imagine that if I saw you walking down the street, I would expect that you have a quite meticulous apartment, but also a slightly glamorous beach house that has,
Love
the
it.
kind of French door windows that you can open and big white curtains that can flap in the air, and that you would sit on its deck and drink orange wine, perhaps.
What is orange wine?
It's a I do not care for it. It's a sort of, I don't even know how they make it. It is the newly fashionable sort of wine
Oh, I like it.
that to me tastes a little bit weird, but it's definitely very glamorous.
Well, I love that. I love everything you're saying about me. I don't have the beach house, but clearly need one. And I love those movies. Who's that does Jack Nicholson, Something's Got to Give, where they're in that beautiful Hamptons house. I know I'm not alone. I see
Yeah.
myself there too. I
Yeah.
see
I would
myself
also
there.
say that you would be there either with a husband or a medium-sized dog, but not both.
You could almost be a psychic, although I have a pug.
I see. I see. I could be a bad psychic. I could say things confidently, but wrong.
Thanks for listening. I like all sorts of books, so you can expect a wide variety of authors on my show. Next up is American author Leah Carpenter, who wrote Ilium, an espionage novel about a young woman who falls in love and unwittingly becomes the perfect asset in a long overdue finale to a covert special op. If you have any questions you'd like me to ask her, please text or email me. Or if you have books you can recommend, please do. You can find me on Instagram or Substack under my name, Elena Bose. Thanks again. See you next time.